Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where 21st century educators come to share, learn, and be inspired. We believe in the growth mindset, creativity, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and strategic uses of education technology. Our mission is to share news and views from teachers who are crushing it in the classroom and making a difference for learners everywhere. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's jump into today's episode. Today I'm speaking with Mandy Froehlich. Mandy is a director of innovation and technology in Wisconsin and the author of The Fire Within: Lessons from Defeat That Have Inspired a Passion for Learning. She's also the author of the upcoming Divergent EDU. Mandy is a co-host on the BAM Radio Network's Teachers Aid podcast. Follow her on Twitter at FroehlichM and catch her writing at mandyfroehlich.com. Mandy, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
Always. I'm always ready to talk education.
Love it. Why don't you start by telling us about your current context in education?
Sure. So I am, again, the Director of Innovation and Technology for a school district in Ripon, Wisconsin. And I'm a former teacher, taught elementary school and middle school, 1 year in middle school. And then I moved into a tech integrator position and my current administrative position. And so I just basically manage the district technology and professional development that goes along with it. Okay.
You've got my dream job, Mandy. So teacher goals, getting there someday.
You know what? It's mine as well. However, being a tech integrator was my absolute favorite position.
So, Mandy, we're going to start with some adversity. Tell us about a low moment that you faced somewhere along the journey, somewhere in your education career, and then just as importantly, how you worked through it.
Yeah. So I think probably the lowest point in my teaching career was after I had been teaching about 5 years. So I was one of these statistics. I had become completely disengaged and thought that I wanted to actually leave teaching. And I think what was so surprising about it was I went into teaching absolutely loving it. And I knew what the statistics were. And I was, very aware of them and had actually said, that's never going to happen to me because I love teaching so much. But after 5 years, I was completely burnt out. I had gone through some professional adversity with some workplace bullying and things like that. And so I found myself kind of blaming the district for different things that were going on. And so I took another job in another phenomenal district close to where I lived. And that's where I was actually a tech integrator. I took the position, and even though I loved the position, the negativity was really towards education in general and, administration and all of these things that I felt had burned me in my other district. And so when it followed me to another district, when I had been blaming them for all of my prior issues, I realized that there was parts of it that I needed to kind of really just take hold of and take responsibility for. And those parts I needed to take and re-engage myself. And so I did a few things. I started to purposefully stay away from negativity. Sometimes that meant staying out of the teacher's lounge and eating by myself in a classroom or in my car. I had done that too, just to try to avoid it, depending upon, the school I was in. I worked in several different schools. I started to read more professional books, which I had stopped doing after college because to me, professional books in college were full of lots of statistics and were very difficult to read. And I didn't realize that books could be, easier to read and more engaging. And so I figured that out and started reading more and going to free conferences like ed camps. But mainly I got on Twitter and I really built my professional learning network, which is, those are the people that keep me engaged in my profession. And then I had started my blog as well and started to do some deep reflecting in that. And that is really how I brought myself back around to being engaged again.
I love every piece of that, Mandy. And I think it's such a good recipe really for any educator that's out there. I think about Twitter and what a source of possibility and positivity we have within education on Twitter, right? I mean, it's nothing, it feels like there's really not much complaining. It's just a continual source of inspiration. And I really love that about let's say, our niche on Twitter. And then when you mentioned the book angle, I have to completely agree, because the books that a lot of us read in our undergrad are some of the worst reading, let's face it, some of the worst reading we've ever done. But when you look at what's available now coming out from different publishers, Dave Burgess being one of the bigger ones, the language of these books is so practical and engaging. So love those steps. Speaking of books, you recently published a book called The Fire Within, Lessons from Defeat That Have Inspired a Passion for Learning. Tell us about the heart and the main message of this book. Why did you write it, and what do you want educators to take away from it?
So the reason that I wrote it was actually because it stemmed from a conversation with my friend Tara Martin, and actually from ISTE. Let's see, ISTE 2017 now. I'm so used to saying ISTE last year, but that's not actually the case anymore. We had a discussion on the plane home, and we were talking about our experiences as children, and her and I grew up in very similar situations, had some similar experiences, but we took to school very differently. And her and I talked through some of those experiences, which mine is in my book. And when I was done with it, we kind of bonded over this experience more than we, had even before. And there were a few things that I got from the conversation. The first was that I felt such a relief in talking to her about this because it wasn't something that I had mentioned before to anybody, or at least not to many people, because my childhood experiences were child abuse, and I felt like people would judge me if they knew that, because I worked with children, and some people, that whole apple doesn't fall far from the tree mentality, and I was really, really scared of that. But we talked a lot about how we were given a different toolbox for helping students who maybe, were in the same situations that we were in, or who were struggling. And I was really proud of that when I was done with that conversation. And then I became a little bit angry that I felt like I had to keep that in for so long. So that was one of the things that kind of led me to write the book. The other thing was that I had written a blog post, actually once the book had already been started. And the blog post was regarding a very difficult time that I had back in December. And I had an experience that brought out my anxiety and my depression, and I blogged about it. And honestly, it was one of those 2 a.m, pounding out a blog, probably should have read it twice type experiences. And I put the blog post out, and just admitting that I had this anxiety and I had this depression, and I was trying really, really hard to deal with it. And people really needed to stop telling me, oh, just be happy, or, just don't be nervous. Like, those were the answers to anxiety and depression. And that I was really working very, very hard to be normal. And I had such the outpouring of not only support, but people who felt the same way and were looking for the same kind of support I was just incredible. And so it was those combination of those two things that led to the way The Fire Within was written. So the heart of the book is really, it's about trauma, it's about adversity, it's about how people overcome those things. And for teachers in particular, how they use their strengths that they gain from those experiences with their students. On top of that, we have a psychologist who wrote a chapter on how trauma affects the body and the brain, and what we can do to try to combat that the best that we can. And I also wrote a chapter on secondary traumatic stress, more to address some of the mental health issues of teachers and how we can combat that and bring awareness.
That's fantastic, Mandy. I think about your book, excuse me, your book, The Fire Within, and Tara's book, Be Real. And I think what both of you are touching on is just the human side of the profession, right? I think in this age of, I mentioned the inspiration on Twitter, and we could go on to Instagram and Pinterest. And I think one of the dangers of that is that, we get this idea of where we should be. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we lose sight of the fact that, hey, every teacher has a story. Every person has a secret battle that you know nothing about, and we all have our stuff to deal with. We all come from different places of pain, and I think just the authenticity that you're writing with, it sounds like, man, more teachers need to get a hold of that. So love that message.
Thank you. And I completely agree. And I do sometimes think that we forget, because we're supposed to put our best face forward all the time because we're working with kids. It's really important that we are honest, but also that we are not, it's a very delicate balance between being honest and throwing your own personal issues onto your students. And I think that because we try to put our best foot forward, people look at us and are like, I have these issues, but I'm the only one. Nobody else has the same issues as me. And the one thing that I've heard over and over again is people say to me, I look at your blog and I look at your book and I've seen you present and you look so put together. I would have never guessed that you have that going on. And I said, you know what? I play normal really, really well, as do some of our students. That's maybe one of my strengths, is playing normal. But I promise you that there are times that at the end of the day, when I've had to work extra, extra hard to play normal, that when everybody is gone, I will sit at my desk and cry because I am so tired, and we all have those issues, and it doesn't really matter. Everybody's trying to look put together. That's what we do. But lots of people have those same kinds of issues that they're dealing with every day. And we need to really be aware of that as we're, working with other people.
I can share that, I've experienced marital breakdown years ago in my first marriage. And, a lot of us have gone through similar sorts of stories in the midst of teaching. And with those 28 smiling faces looking up at you, you've got to keep it together. And to some extent, we are actors on a stage every day, but we also need to find time to be authentic and to sort of reckon with ourselves and to find support and share our stories. So awesome, awesome, awesome. Now, Mandy, you're also putting out another book very shortly called Divergent EDU. And it's funny, just yesterday, the word divergent came up in my classroom, my 8th grade classroom. And one girl instantly connected it with, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. There's a teen lit novel series and movie based around divergence. So that sort of spawned another conversation. But tell us about that book. Can you give us any teasers? What is that one going to be about?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, my very first chapter opens up with talking about that exact series. So I had read the Divergent series a while back, and just the word divergent, I really connected with that word for some reason. And in the books, it fascinated me how the divergent people were the dangerous ones. In that series, in a society that's broken up into these factions, it's the divergent ones that they want to eradicate because they're different and they have new ideas and they think on their own.
Right.
And that piece of that piece of literature just always really spoke to me. And it's not the reason why I use Divergent in my book, but every time I think of my book, I do think of that book as well. And so Divergent EDU really just talks about, what makes a divergent teacher. And I took the psychological definition of divergence and I applied it to education. And so what does it mean when you combine those two things? And so I kind of define that in the book. And it has a lot to do with being able to challenge your own assumptions, being highly reflective and things like that in order to, drive yourself forward. And And it's coupled with a lot with innovation in the book, because what the book is based on is my organizational structure called the Hierarchy of Needs for Innovation and Divergent Thinking, which I developed a couple of years ago. And so what that structure is about is what kind of supports need to be in place in order to allow teachers to think this way. Because in being a tech integrator, the one thing I realized was it wasn't so much that teachers didn't want to be innovative or they didn't want to be divergent thinkers. It's that there was so much else on their plates and so much going on all the time,
Right.
that it took away the time and the strength and the energy needed in order to really be that way. And so my hierarchy of needs is based on a few different foundational levels. The first one is climate and culture. The second one is effective leadership. Third is mindset. And fourth is professional development, until you get kind of to this divergent thinking, innovation and divergent thinking. And so all of those foundational pieces support the innovation and divergent thinking. And so it really doesn't have much to do with technology at all. People think innovation and they think technology, but really it's all of those pieces that are in place. And one of the examples I give in the book is if you work in a really negative climate, and you walk down the hall and you hear teachers complaining, and you don't like that because you try to stay away from the negativity, you will probably hold on to that thought, and you will probably think about what they were saying, and you might even go home and complain about it. And all of that time that you're spending trying to avoid the negativity, trying to think through what you're going to say to those teachers the next time, or how much it bothers you, all of that time is taking away from time that you could be reflecting or working on yourself or working on your classroom or becoming more innovative. And so it's the idea that there's so much more to innovation and divergent thinking that we can control and should be controlling in order to give people the support to be that way.
Wow, a lot of juicy topics there, and I'm not going to dive too deeply, but that sounds like another epic release. So look forward to that. I will say this, that, as you know, the traditional education paradigm has really focused on conformity and compliance. And I've been thinking so much about design thinking and how can I open up creativity in my classroom? And so I love the direction you're headed, and you're combining so many great themes there. So look forward to that one coming out. I'll give it a look as soon as I can. Outside of education, Mandy, what's another area of passion and learning for you? We call ourselves lifelong learners. So tell us about an area that interests you outside of education.
Well, I really do spend quite a bit of time studying education and some of those different things. And I do, the one thing that I think that I try to focus on outside of that, just for the simple fact that, nobody has enough time in the day, is my family. And the major learning I've gone through lately, for the last several years, is learning to parent teenagers. And when my kids were little, I was afraid of them being teenagers because you heard all these horrible things all the time, like teenagers did terrible, awful things. And so I felt like it was something that I was really going to have to learn how to do, because I kind of grew into having kids, and I had them from a very young age. And so I learned with them. And I think that it's funny because even though I was so afraid of that, my kids being teenagers is one of my favorite parts of having kids. Now that they have developed their own personalities and they're looking towards their futures. And, my eldest son is a sophomore in college now, and just watching him go through that process of becoming an adult and knowing what he wants to do with his life. It's just been a fascinating experience. And I think the one thing that I've learned that's probably the most important in all of it, that has taught me a lot about life in general, is the importance of saying, I'm sorry, even when you are in a position of quote unquote power, So for example, as being the parent, you are kind of in that position of being able to say yes or no and being right or wrong. And I've learned that there are times that I am wrong, even though when I really, really want to be right. And that the most important thing that I can do is just say I'm sorry and explain why. Sometimes I'm sorry just isn't enough. Sometimes they need to know why you're sorry as well. And I've brought that learning back into my leadership too. And so it was really my kids that taught me that. And so I guess, they kind of go hand in hand when you're talking about education and kids. So I guess that's probably my other passion.
I think there's something incredibly powerful about naming and owning our mistakes. And I think you're absolutely right. It's modeling behavior, right? Because apologizing is learned behavior. I don't think we like to apologize naturally. So absolutely. And it's good to hear from someone on the other side that the teenage years are better than advertised. I know we're very thankful for where our two boys are headed so far. Our older son is 13, so we're just getting into that window ourselves. Share about a personal habit, Mandy, that contributes to your success. Now, you amaze me because there you are in a leadership position. You must have so many people looking to you for all kinds of support and education, and you're putting out books in the meantime and parenting. So tell us how you make it all work. What's a personal habit that I guess makes you tick on a day-to-day basis?
The one thing that I try really hard to do, and I'm not going to lie, it's difficult in Wisconsin because, 11 months out of the year it's snowing. And then the other 1 month this year, we had a mosquito infestation. It was crazy. But the one thing I do try to do is sit outside to work. My office actually doesn't have any windows, which is odd. It also doesn't have a door. So I have a true open door policy. But the lack of windows sometimes, if I'm spending a significant amount of time in my office, can be a little almost draining. And so when I get home, I try really, really hard to sit outside, and whether I'm taking a minute not to work or I have to continue to work, I try to make sure that I'm just getting that fresh air, and things like that. I really would like to start exercising more. That's one of my goals. I think everybody would like to be more active than they are, especially if you work at a desk job. So I swear some days if I wore, a step counter, I would have taken 5 steps when I'm really at my desk a lot. But the sitting outside to work really does me a lot of good, I think, with the sun and the fresh air. So that's what I try and do.
Very cool. Haven't heard that one before. So we're moving into some rapid fire picks now, Mandy.
Okay.
We'll start at Twitter, which is, I'm sure you would agree, every teacher's best place to start building a professional learning community or learning network. So who should we be following on Twitter, and tell us why?
Okay, and I'm actually going to give you 2. So my first one is his name is Evan Abramson, and that's just his Twitter. Evan Abramson is his Twitter handle. And Evan is a good friend of mine who is he is one of the future ready guys for New Jersey. He's me in his school district, so he's a director of technology as well. And he just has a lot of really great ideas. His knowledge of Future Ready is pretty in depth, and he's good at taking some of the abstract things of Future Ready and applying it to typical situations and how you would deal with that. And because of all that, he always has really amazing ideas. So he would be one. And then the other one is a really good friend of mine, whose name is Jennifer Casa-Todd, and she is the author of Social Media. Absolutely love Jennifer. She is the sweetest person ever, and I love how she is so passionate and truly, truly believes that social media can be used for doing amazing things if we just teach the kids how to do it, and that idea of social leadership. So those would be 2 of my many, many people that I'd recommend on Twitter.
Well, it sounds like Jennifer I'm guessing probably isn't a huge fan of I think it was France that recently banned cell phones from high schools. So I like that idea of saying, hey, instead of taking the ban approach, let's think about how we can actually equip and leverage this technology that is sort of ubiquitous already, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And why would you take a learning tool away from kids who have it in their hands every day?
Right. This powerful computer. So next, Mandy, point us to an EdTech tool. Speaking of computers, point us to an EdTech tool that you currently love using in your classroom, or in your case, in your day-to-day work and your development with other educators.
I use Trello. Trello boards a lot, and Trello is not an education tool necessarily. It's a project management tool, but there are so many just great things about having a Trello board for keeping yourself organized. And I have several boards, both that are shared and my own. I keep all of my to-dos on there, all of my checklists, all my documents, everything on them. And I also work as the director of marketing for EduMatch Publishing. And so we use Trello boards for our authors to help keep them in there, kind of in their groove and where they're supposed to be. And so that's probably one of my favorite EdTech tools that I use.
Okay, cool. And then recommend a book. Now, we've talked about yours. What about other books that you've been reading lately, or maybe one from the summer, or maybe one of your all-time faves?
Sure. The one that I just finished a little bit ago, and I tend to do that thing where I'm reading 8 books at once. But the one I just finished, I've been reading it for a while, is Professionally Driven by Jarod Bormann. And I love his book because it is really centered around personalized PD and it's very practical on how you can implement that in your district, how anybody can do it. It's just kind of an organizational structure. So I really enjoyed that book a lot.
Very cool. And I know you're a podcast listener. Tell us about, and producer, I should say, or host is maybe the right term. Recommend a podcast that you're listening to and tell us why you love it.
Well, I'm going to recommend mine, I guess. It's the BAM Radio Network's Teacher's Aid. And for Teacher's Aid, we try to stick to topics that have to do with social emotional support for teachers, which is really, really important to me. I think that so many people are all about what we can do best for the students, which we absolutely should be. But sometimes people tend to trample over teachers in the quest of doing what's best for students. And I'm a firm believer that we can only do what's best for students if we're doing what's best for teachers as well. So those are the types of topics we tend to try to hit with Teacher's Aid.
And that's co-hosted with John Harper, right?
That is correct. Yep, that is co-hosted with John Harper, and John is amazing and lovely and one of the smartest people I know. So
yeah, he's a cool dude. And then last question, Mandy, you're at the end of your day and you've got no energy left for writing books or developing courses or whatever other work you're doing for educators in your district. So tell us about something you're watching on Netflix right now.
I love this question. I'm not a TV watcher typically, but my friend Evan actually got me hooked on the show Suits. And it's fascinating because before I got into education, I actually wanted to be a lawyer and was I had wanted to do that since I was 4 years old. And so watching the show, I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorites.
Mandy, this has been fantastic and informative. Love what you're putting out there. And for anyone not following you, you need to get on that right away. What are the best ways for people to reach out and get to know more of your content?
My Twitter handle is @FroehlichM, and I use Twitter quite a bit. But my blog is mandyfroehlich.com, and so I try to post to that once a week is typically when I do, but I also keep all of my book information on there. So if we start a new book study or anything like that, it gets thrown on. And I'm on other social media like Instagram, and then you can find my book, The Fire Within, currently on Amazon, and Divergent EDU will be pre-released the middle of November.
All right, that's coming up soon. You must have some big deadlines ahead of you.
I do.
All right, so we wish you well with that. And Mandy, thanks again so much for your time today. Have a wonderful school year and all the best with Divergent EDU.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Teachers on Fire, where teachers come to share, learn, and be inspired. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review on iTunes, and follow us on Twitter @TeachersOnFire. I'm your host, Tim Cavey, saying goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time, right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast.